catch the ball.
And then they make a play and they're all like, "Whoa."
They move around.
They're running around and it's like, okay, big.
The tendency to go.
Yeah, they have.
I love that age. That's my favorite age to watch. Learning, they're learning the whole thing. You need to get home and be like, oh.
Yeah. Afterwards, I'm like,
The first year they did girls softball.
You must be the
You need to be
older
the president.
eight of us now.
Next year I was like, as you get home, hey, parents.
Okay.
Because,
so
oh, they do something. They look
All right, it's 7 o'clock. Let's call the meeting to order. Start with the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag. One nation.
Wrong.
We'll wait. So on that note, please silence your phones. Other announcements, exits are on the side. There's restrooms in the lobby. If you got to take a conversation, please do it out in the lobby area. Business cards, sign-in sheets out in the back. So as we're running the meeting, whomever you are, we're going to give you an opportunity to be heard. And eventually the board will be asking you some questions. If there are exhibits, you're welcome to use them, whether it be on the screen or if you have handheld. If you are talking about an exhibit, please do your very best to use compass directions instead of, hey, look over here, look over there, because the record is going to be difficult to, as we read the minutes, what you mean by that. But if you use compass directions or structures and things that can help identify what it is that you're talking about, basically, use your words, the record will be as clear as possibly can be. With that, let's go to approval of the minutes. April 18th, 2022. I know, Matt, you were necessarily absent, so if there are questions, let's discuss
I read the
them.
meeting and I make a motion we approve.
Thank you, Fred. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sarah. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thanks so much. One abstain. With one abstain. All right. First on the agenda. Cases Superior signs. Come on up.
Close.
I still didn't do it right, did I?
That's okay.
Say it for me.
Cassis.
Cassis.
Yes. I'm Christina from Cassis Signs.
And I'm Corey from Coles, where the sign would be.
Okay, so last time you were here, an issue was brought up with regard to how we distinguish between the CVS sign that's on Target and what you're asking for Kohl's and the Sephora sign. So we looked into that a little bit. Our code enforcement officer gave us some thoughts and comments. And I think there is some potential distinctions, and that's going to go, I think, to the intent of the code. I think we've talked about this before, just a quick review. Looking at the code and the purpose of the signage of itself is not to have so many, if you will, business signs and brand names sprayed, especially all about, if you will, in this development as well as over by the mall. So the thought is the CVS, certainly if we understand it, it was permitted under the current sign code back in 2016. Before I go any further, did you read Al's comments? Okay, so in a nutshell, what he was concerned about is that the CVS pharmacy leased, it's not a separate brand name. CVS is a separate, in and of itself, a separate company. And we've talked about this, I think, in the first meeting and trying to figure out what is Sephora. Is it a separate brand name? Is it a separate company? Is it leasing a a piece from Kohl's. So can you shed some light on that, on how that relationship with Sephora is specific to whether or not are they leasing it from Kohl's? Is it just a brand name? How does that work?
Yep, so they're not leasing the space from us. It's a partnership. And I mean, I think our biggest thing is that it's not advertising a brand that we sell, it's advertising a shop within the store. So it is a brand in the same way that Kohl's is a brand, but not necessarily in the way that, Under Armour or iPhone that have been brought up in the past are. It's a brand is the store. Like, we're not selling Sephora product, if that makes sense.
Go ahead.
It's more the brand of the store, not I think the code is a brand that you sell.
But if we talk about Dick's for a moment, Nike and Adidas and all those, they're not intermixed together. My recollection is when you go into Dick's, there is a Nike section, there is a Champion section, and they're carved out, and I think it's intentional, it's on purpose that they do that. And I'm
But I guess the thing
struggling
is,
with how is it different with Sephora?
we don't sell Sephora. Sephora is not the brand that we sell. There's
Yeah.
hundreds of brands that are in the shop. Like, we don't sell Sephora.
Just like CVS doesn't sell, well, CVS has their own brand of pills. However, they sell Advil, they sell Tylenol. They're not going to put the Tylenol sign on their,
My understanding, though, is the
Same
CVS
thing.
leases from Target. Sephora's not leasing from Kohl's, so
but they're
It's not a fair-
merging together as a brand. That's
But
why.
the code follows the leasee, right, or leasee, person leasing the space, or the entity leasing the space. So in this particular case, there's one entity, and there's a partnership with
Right.
Sephora, but it really isn't much different, at least from my view of, again,
And like-
Dick's having a partnership with Nike or whatever to exclusively hold a particular clothing line or something.
And I guess that's where I see the difference, is the code, that was up there before, says you can't display a brand that you sell. That's not what we're doing. It's a shop within our, you know what I mean? It's not Nike or Under Armour. Like, that's not a apples to
But the-
apples comparison to me.
But the code wants the name of the organization leasing the space, the sign on the wall, right? So if you're Dick's, you're not going to put Nike. If that kind of
Right.
thing. And I think also in the case of CVS I think has not a dedicated entrance, but there's also an entrance there to the right of the entrance of Target. So if you're looking at the main entrance of Target, on the right, CVS has its own entrance. And again, the code talks about how you get one sign per entrance so it's not too much of a stretch if you're leasing space from within an organization and you have an entrance and an exit. It pretty much falls in line with. Did they need a variance for that?
I wasn't here to comment on it.
I don't remember a variance given.
Read through it.
CVS?
I'm not sure CVS does have its own entrance.
Yeah.
If you
But the code, you're right
Hold
with
on.
what you're quoting.
There you take recycling.
if you're facing Target, on the right it has its own crosswalk.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a bottle redemption center.
Is that what that is?
Has its own
Okay.
entrance, yeah.
Okay, I stand corrected then.
You're citing the code right in that a subtenant has their own entrance, they're allowed to have a sign. Any subtenant is allowed to have a sign as well, but you're trying to differentiate something else here because Sephora is not going to be a tenant.
Sure. But I think the guidance is if Sephora were a subtenant, they would be allowed a sign, but the sum of the signs have to still meet the square footage of the code at least
Right.
for variance. So if Sephora was a
Frontage.
subtenant, you wouldn't need to be in front of us.
Right.
Like, again, I don't believe CVS ever came in front of us because I think today, as CVS exists within Target, it meets the code. That's the difference.
Yeah, no, and I totally get that, and I get the point of it. I guess I'm just going by the wording of the code is a brand you sell, and that's not what we're
Sephora
trying to
is.
put out.
Right, so Right. Looking at it globally, and one of the criteria is it going to change the character of the neighborhood? And potentially, it would.
Okay.
Is when you look at all those businesses that are out there, and if this particular variance is granted, it's going to be that, Dollars to Donuts, the Stickley, and Our House, and every other retailer's going to come in there and says, well, we want Serta on the building, we want Lazy Boy in the building, we want Nike on the building. It's like, and then where does it go? Where does that line? Go ahead.
I think that, yes, but I understand where you're coming from. You don't want to open the can of worms. However, the reason why this is happening is because Kohl's and Sephora are partnering together, and that's why Kohl's is changing all their signage. I understand this is not just in the town of Victor, but across the entire nation, they're changing all their signage to show that they are partnering together as one, even though they're not technically leasing from them. There is some way, somehow, that they're getting compensated for the fact that they're putting their name together.
You're not partnering, because I thought we had asked that question before, is there a partnership, a legal partnership between Kohl's and Sephora?
Yeah, they're not leasing the space from us, but we can't.
It's a partnership. The debate we had was it a partnership or like an acquisition?
It's not an
It's
acquisition.
not an acquisition.
So we're still
It's just
two
a partnership,
separate
a strategic
companies,
partnership,
Yep.
two companies coming together to.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm here,
just
I
the
can Google
same.
Dick's Sporting Goods and
Right.
Nike, and there's Dick's Sporting Goods announces partnership with Nike Connect to do this. And so, Kohl's and Sephora, very similar, announced long-term strategic partnership. Companies do that all the time, right? That's, that's what they're out there trying to do. I just struggle to see, like, again, if we could list the number of partnerships that a Walmart or a Nike or whoever have, I think to Mike's point, there'd be a lot of them.
Right, and I guess that's, and I keep repeating it, and I guess we just view it differently, because if someone came and said, I want to put an Under Armour sign in, the point is, well, that's not what Kohl's did. We didn't put an Under Armour or a Champion. We sell all those brands. We're not putting a brand we sell on it. We're putting
Another company.
another company that's within us. And I think that's the differentiation. If somebody comes in, with the can of worms part, if they come in with that, that's, well, Kohl's was allowed to do it because it's a separate shop. It's 3 walls. It's not just like a section, of a brand we sell. It's hundreds of brands. It's a shop.
Is there an instance when Sephora is going to stand on its own? You know what I mean?
have-
For example, CVS, you can find a CVS
They
all by
have,
itself.
there's a Sephora store in the mall. They have thousands of stores.
Okay, then it goes back to if CVS can stand on its own, but yet if it wants to, it may lease from Target. And I don't know if it leases exclusively with Target, or if they go or would do Walmart or Kmart or any of the, I don't know if Kmart still exists, but a kind of department store like that.
Well, they used to be, obviously, with JCPenney. And then JCPenney went to bankruptcy, so that's why they dropped JCPenney, and they got out of that deal. And then they got into a partnership with Kohl's. I don't believe that the fact that they're doing all of this is gonna be a short-term partnership. It's a long-term partnership. And if, yes, down the road, if something happens to Kohl's, they're gonna still stand alone in their mall store. And nothing else will change to the neighborhood. The sign will come down, everything will
go
go
ahead.
back to the way it was.
Okay.
Was Sephora ever listed on JCPenney's at the mall?
They have, I don't think there's anything permanent. They have window, like above all their doors they've got, but I think it's on glass, so I don't think it'd be considered permanent.
But Sephora is a brand name, correct? They sell Sephora products.
They sell Sephora Collection.
That has Sephora's name on it.
Sephora Collection is their brand.
So it is like a Champion or Nike.
Their brand is Sephora Collection. Sephora is their store where they sell
Just like
all sorts of stuff.
CVS has their.
Right, they have,
Right,
like
but-
that type of thing.
I mean, you keep trying to differentiate between the two, but Sephora is still a brand.
They have their own brand of,
Right.
but they
But
are
you
a
keep saying that
company
it's a
as well.
partnership and you're not selling a specific brand, but Sephora is a brand.
Sephora Collection is the brand that they sell,
Correct.
yeah.
Okay.
Right, got questions?
Well, I think the most telling difference is that CVS rents a clearly defined space in the store, and they have frontage. There's no window on there, that's not really apparently a requirement, but they do have frontage, so they can have the sign. It's based on the amount of frontage a tenant has, and they're clearly a tenant, what money they take in, CVS keeps. It's not Target's money. So they would not need a variance. They have every right to have the sign on the wall.
Recommended for your approval.
That's certainly a fundamental difference in the business operation. The penny store has a Sephora, looks a lot like that one on the right there. As you get close enough to the door to look in, you see the Sephora sign. I don't know if that's a sign on the building or not, but that's what Penny's has.
And so when you walk through the door on the right, it says Sephora. You're not walking into the Sephora space. You're first walking into Kohl's, and you have to get to Sephora.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So it is, again, I'm trying to figure out where the line is here on the difference between CVS, you do walk through Target, and however many steps over to get where CVS is, but once you're in there, in that space, you are in CVS. It's a leased premises. Where here, it is still Kohl's
Right,
all the way through the store.
yeah.
I'm trying to find where that line is, and I'm having a hard time
I
figuring
think the
that out.
line is the lease. To be completely honest, if Sephora was leasing the space, a portion of the space from Sephora, I think it'd be just like CVS. I don't,
So
if it was if they were a subtenant,
the way that it's different is that CVS is a pharmacy. They're their own store within Target. CVS has its own registers. You're not purchasing medicine from Target. You're purchasing the medicine from CVS.
By law, Target cannot sell pharmaceuticals.
They're not.
but I don't think the code gets that specific. I think it's much more of a subtenant, regardless of how the books are made. I think a subtenant would be allowed to have signage. Now, again, the square footage of that signage is going to force you to have a smaller Kohl's sign, maybe. There's still those restrictions unless you come for a variance. But I think the code doesn't get as specific as, again, the books. It's really a subtenant. So if Nike was a subtenant of Dick's, I think Nike would be entitled to signage, again, meeting the total square footage requirements. But that's the line I'm drawing here is
So even if, to CVS's example, you take a generic, let's say CVS vitamins, I think in theory, you could take that bottle of CVS vitamins and not go to the CVS cashier. You can go to the main cashier, scan it out, but I'm going to take a pretty good guess, I think I'm right, is even though it's the Target scanner or cashier, that money goes to CVS. It doesn't go to Target. Target gets its own piece from the leased premises. Where in Sephora, you take that item of Sephora and you go to Kohl's. Does it go to Sephora or does it go to Kohl's?
It goes to Kohl's.
Okay.
But I don't see the code getting into any of that.
I don't. It's the intent of the code. I think the intent of
The
the
lease is
code.
what's important.
lease is
I was
what's
just
important, yeah.
helping differentiate how, because CVS leases, they're like a store within a store. Because they're.
Sure. And if Sephora leased, to us, they would be like a store within a store, even though they may be a supplier or a subcontractor to Sephora. And and Sephora's, I personally don't care how who buys from who or whatever. But the way I think it is the lease agreement.
Right.
And it doesn't, we don't specify that the lease agreement has to have, some type of, how the financial transactions are made or not. I think
I'm
it's.
just looking a little more globally, is the board can look to the intent of the code. There isn't we have the code, you look at it, and when you look at the code as a whole, is what is the intent of the code? Board doesn't write it. This zoning board doesn't write it. The town board does. All the time that we've experienced sign questions, it has come down to storefront, you get a name, a business name. If you have multiple businesses, if you want a monument, you don't get the current code I'm talking about. You don't get every brand that store sells. You get one. And the purpose of it is so you don't have, or this town doesn't have, sprayed all over the place advertising signs. You limit it within reason. So to try and find why it is the Sephora needs that sign that requires a variance and won't change the character of the neighborhood. I think that, and also it being significant, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing why that sign needs to be there when other stores and other brands are being sold can survive. And the message that I'm seeing that you wrote in the first place was that to let everybody know that Sephora's here, that Sephora's in Kohl's. Mm-hmm. Well, whether it be Country Max or anything, you see advertising, Imes is on sale. Lets me know if I want to go buy Imes, I can go to Country Max, right? There isn't an Imes sign all over Country Max, or Nike is on sale this week. I'm going to go get some Nike golf shoes at Dick's. There doesn't need to be signage on Dick's. So I'm not understanding your message that the public needs to know the Sephora's in Kohl's, and it needs a sign.
Well, Sephora is a store within the store, even though they're technically not leasing. Because they are gonna have registers. And if I'm walking into Sephora through Kohl's, through that entrance, I'm gonna go straight to buy my eyeliner or my mascara, whatever, and there's registers right there. I'm not gonna walk and waste my time unless I absolutely need something in the rest of the store. That's why they're doing what they're doing. And because everything failed before, and because of the way that everything's going with the malls and how they're not really probably doing great, that's why they decided to do this business element where they, even though they're technically on paper leasing from them, but they are doing a business partnership.
And for an understanding, I've heard you say a few times that Kohl's and Sephora are doing this everywhere else. Well, the codes are different everywhere else. We really should not be looking at whether Pittsford or whatever's being done in Arizona. It's the code we look at is Victor's code. That's what we need to go by. Okay, and I understand what you're telling me, that Kohl's and Sephora elsewhere are in this relationship, and elsewhere it's like that. But we're in Victor, and we have to deal with Victor's code.
Well, did the Sephora sign on Penny's get a variance, or should have got a variance, or is that okay?
Not to hurt my own argument, but I don't think theirs is permanent, because it's on glass, so my guess is it's that.
It's also
A
inside the
decal
wall.
or-
It's not on the building.
Yeah, it's, you said it was an inside?
It's inside.
So you could do the same, you could do the same
They have it on
thing.
the outer entrances because I went and checked to see if they had one. But it's on that
It's
glass
like a
above
window
the door.
decal.
Yeah, so I
It's
don't
not-
think it's
So
permanent.
you could do the same thing.
That would be an option, yeah.
Not as big as you'd like to have, but it would at least be outside.
Yeah, as is, I mean, I concur with what Mike and I think everyone else is saying, is that it doesn't meet the bar for its own sign, but I think the remediation is either something like they're talking about, a decal, an A-frame or whatever, which probably isn't as appealing as they want, or work with Sephora and get a lease agreement. And again, a lease agreement doesn't mean you get an extra sign. So I don't want anyone to quote me and say, oh, Matt in your past said if we get a lease agreement, we get all these signs. It'll either, to be compliant with the code, it'll have to replace the sign or make one sign smaller or one bigger or whatever. But I think if they would have if you would've just went to the code enforcement officer and you had a lease agreement for space, again, similar to CVS, this would look just like the CVS deal, right? I don't see how.
The building is big enough where the sign that they're proposing would still meet the frontage requirements and,
So, my recommendation is to have those conversations between Sephora and Kohl's and see if there's some type of lease agreement, because that's the model that works here in Victor. It might not work somewhere else, wherever, but the model here in Victor is based off of, lease agreements, and companies that lease space are entitled to signage. Or, again, you can get creative and do decals and A-frames and those other things, but.
So I think you probably are sensing what direction the board is feeling on this right now. And when that's happened in the past, we've given applicants some choices because, well, we certainly can't give you legal advice with it, but there are consequences to a board denying a variance. There's a period of time that you have to wait and reapply, or there's other recourses certainly you can take. Sometimes, though, an applicant will say, well, gee, do I have any other choices? And a choice certainly could be you withdraw the application, which gives you more latitude to figure out what it is that you want to do, whether it be reapplying a different mechanism, get some legal advice on what your options are. There's a whole host of other things to do or you could do. The other thing you could do is say, look, could we have a little bit more time? Can we come back and the next time and talk about it some more? We'd certainly be willing to do that. The whole idea here is to give you those options so that you go forward with at least eyes wide open what you want to do. So if you'd like the board to make a decision, we certainly can go through it and do it. If you want to withdraw, that's your option. You can do it. If you want to come back in a couple of weeks, you can certainly do that too. Or if you have anything else you want to add or talk about, absolutely. Just let us know. What would you like to do?
All right, we're gonna withdraw our application.
All right, so all I ask then is if you would send an email confirming that. The minutes are here. If you could do it tomorrow, something in the nature of, pursuant to the board meeting on May 2nd, we've decided to withdraw.
Now, just before.
Sure.
100%. So if we do that, then we just have to reapply for a sign permit if we do, for example, if we do decide to go with a lease agreement and they do decide to lease, an example.
If there are changes to your current application, for example, if a lease agreement were to have been developed, that's something new. Again, I would.
So I think you're saying if they withdrew completely,
right,
the normal process would just be a sign permit if they had a lease
Correct.
agreement.
Yeah, that's what
They
I'm
wouldn't
asking.
come in front of
Okay,
us.
okay, understand.
so if you changed your sign permit application, or, if you give me the same application, I'm going to recommend you to the zoning board, like we just did, because unless you present me with a lease. Right.
That's what they're
Well,
saying.
that's what
I
I'm
think
saying.
that's what
If
they're
I
asking.
do
If they-
present you with the lease, then all I have to do is submit a new sign permit for the same application with the lease agreement.
You can keep the permit application you have,
Okay,
just present the lease so that we can review that.
okay.
And move
And then
forward.
I don't have to come back to the board.
Right.
Just
Or
goes through
if you
you.
wanted to change your idea of how you're going to try
Right,
to
I
display the
understand.
signage, it would be
Yeah.
a new permit.
Okay. All right, then we
Sound good?
withdraw.
Okay, then just formalize it tomorrow.
We'll do.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Thanks so
All
much.
right, thank you for your time.
All right, good luck. Yes, have a good night. There's Steve Turtle.
Yep. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We have a little more information.
Yep.
Robert Graham reviewed the drawings, and we have those now.
Okay.
So now we have a much better idea of what your thoughts are.
Apologize about that. For
Oh, no, that's not right. There we go. So we have the front elevation, so now that makes sense. Okay. So to put a little more detail into it then, the enclosure that you're talking about would be used when, fair to say, business is closed? That's the primary purpose for it?
yeah, for security, yep.
Okay. So now that makes much more sense as opposed to, where I was thinking originally that you wanted to enclose it while customers and whatnot are in there. This is more of security.
Yeah, we'll take as much sun as we can get. We don't want to get burned on the patio out there.
Got it.
But yeah,
got it.
no.
Okay, great. All right, now that that's cleared up, Matt, do you have any questions, concerns, thoughts about this?
I don't. I obviously wasn't here for the last meeting, and so I'm, somewhat up to speed, but.
Okay, well, let's circle around then. Sarah, questions, comments, concerns?
Nope, I have nothing.
Great. Donna?
I just have a question on what Robert Graham wrote on his last paragraph.
Get to that, go ahead.
That the planning board, not appear that the planning board approved the covered roof at this time.
So we've spoken to the planning board. They've okayed everything.
Okay.
They don't want to review it or see it
Okay.
again.
Nope, that's my only question. Thank you.
Good. Fred, questions?
No,
Okay. Any questions from the public? For, against, concerns?
I just have a comment, if I could.
Yep, go ahead.
I would just request that the resolution state that no heating elements were approved as part of the sprinkler waiver, and that any use or installation of heating elements would render the waiver null and void.
You okay with that? Or you thinking about having heating elements in there?
I mean, I was not, I don't know, is thermal, I've heard of thermal, which is a little more like it.
In some previous conversation, I believe from planning board meetings, I believe you stated that there would be no heating elements, and there's none submitted in the permit.
Okay, well then, we won't.
Well, because the concern, anytime we've looked at waivers, it's the combustibles. And it goes back to the firefighters that go in there, and if they don't know what's in there, it creates another hazard on top of that.
Sure.
So if this is just a security, once you're done for the night, you shut it down. I think you described it as like garage door or some type of, again, a security to keep the merchandise safe.
Right, correct. I guess just to ask a question, if I were, I mean, it does get, in September, it starts to get a little bit cold as soon as the sun goes down. So I think one question that I would have just to ask is if I ever wanted to put some small heaters, just for the people that were around the bar, do I have to apply again, or how would that work?
All right, let's explore that a minute. So if the heaters, we're talking about heaters, the propane heaters, or those heaters that are plugged into a 220 line, something different?
Well, I guess I have a couple of mushroom heaters that run on a propane tank, that we've used in the past, but I was curious if something was, because the idea that we saw this on was down south, they had fans and thermal heaters, not necessarily an electric heater, but I'm not too familiar with thermal, but I guess it radiates heat. It makes you feel warm, but it's not like hot.
It's like IR, almost like a heat lamp.
Right. So that's kind of the idea we thought, obviously we're not in construction, so we weren't aware of all this process to go through all this, so we're just kind of knocking things down as they come across our plan here.
Well, if you were to install anything like that, it'd require a permit.
Okay,
So then we could review it.
review it then.
And
Yeah.
we would have to determine whether or not the building could continue to be non-sprinklers.
Okay, not a problem. I mean, I
Good
haven't,
question. This is to cover the exterior where people are eating and drinking, or, because I heard security.
yeah, so basically, I think I can use this part, so you'll kind of see, like, you'll have a chair here, people would be sitting facing this, they would be facing this wall, because this is a side view, and I know I'm not supposed to be saying side. I guess if you're at the road and you're looking north at the building, this is, you know, people would have their backs, and they would be like this. So what I'm saying is that where we have these chairs, we put some tile down to just so that somebody didn't fall if they were pulling a chair out on the turf, because the turf is very grippy. And
Let me stop you there just for a
Yep,
quick.
sure.
What you're pointing to is the south elevation and describing.
Yep, I'm sorry, yep, pointing to the south elevation. And so somebody would be sitting here, but above their head would be a small roof. It only extends out, I think on the other diagram, it shows how far it comes out, but it's only about 4 feet, maybe 3.5, maybe, I'm not sure. But, so it just overhangs your head a little bit. We wanted to keep the sun we wanted to keep it open air as much as possible. So it was really just, you know, and sometimes, unfortunately, we get some nasty storms that come in at angles. So I think we were just trying to make sure that if we had a storm coming in this way, that we would be able to try and keep it protected, you know, at least until we got the doors down on
I understand.
a rainstorm, I guess.
Those in stormy type weather, you're still open for business, right? So you're just trying to protect, again, the merchandise. During business hours, potentially customers would be in that, in the patio area?
Yeah, well, we learned a lot over COVID when we were in the parking lot and we had a tent, and then we had, you know, tables in the coned area. And some of these storms, we're watching the radar almost every night. The storms affect our business very much as far as like golf leagues coming in, if it rains, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes these storms come in and they just miss us and nothing changes, or sometimes they come in and they graze us. And sometimes it's just a complete washout, so obviously we wouldn't be out there. But we've had some, you know, every day is just kind of different out there with how the weather treats us. So we kind of just are.
Would there ever be an occasion that on the patio,
Sure.
completely enclosed with customers still in it?
No.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, no.
Right.
No.
So this is what sounds like it's two purposes. One, if that inclement weather comes in, just to shield that wayward
Sure.
side.
Yep.
The only time it would be completely enclosed is business is done, you're closed up for the night, and you're locking it down, nobody's in it.
Yep. Yep. And it's something that we plan on not staffing the whole entire time. You know, we see it as, and we're noticing it right now. I mean, even just how we're waiting on people, it's taking us a very long time to get them service because our distance is so far from either the point of sale machine or alcoholic beverages or non-alcoholic beverages, ice, food, et cetera. So we're just trying to maximize our efficiency and give better service out there. That's one of the second main reason to having this covered area.
Okay. Brian, questions?
Now, I think putting a permanently mounted heater is a pretty big deal. And if you could use those portable ones, slide them over, it would be easier for me to vote for it.
Sure.
I don't think there's heaters on the table as part of this, right? I think you made it clear that if there are heaters, they're gonna have to reapply for a
I
permit.
totally
We're
understand.
not talking about
Yeah.
the whole patio.
Yep.
We're just talking about underneath the structures.
I get it, and I will tell you this, my plan is to be there for a very long time, so if I do ever put it back, or if I ever come to the board and want to put those in, I plan on putting in a sprinkler system within that little area already. I tried to get the Empire I tried to get a quote, and they were like kind of confused, because I have no heating elements out there, so they were like, wait, well, why do you need this? And I was like, well, I need to get a quote, so can you just write me a quote? And then the fire marshal, was in contact with him, trying to make sure that my ducks were in a row, and they had responded to me and said, hey, we understand this more now, it's not a problem, et cetera, et cetera. So I just kind of backed off of that quote, although they told me that it was going to be north of $5,000. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll just wait to get something official if I have to.
Okay. Is that it, Fred?
Yep.
Donna, questions?
Is there any electric out in this park?
Yeah, so we have, everything will be GFI rated, and really, we'll have just 2 TVs on the back wall, and then some coolers just to hold canned beer, or if we don't run a system where we have the soda guns and all that stuff, depending on how we want to winterize it at night and all that stuff, it might be, once we get this up and running, we really want to kind of feel it out and understand how to operate out there before we keep throwing money into this patio. So, but there is just plugs, and everything will just be standard, I'm not an electrician, but maybe 120 volt, like pretty normal stuff plugged in.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Nope, I'm good, so.
Question for Fred, you having firefighting experience. Thoughts on fire extinguishers in there? Don't need them. It's for how he's describing what he's doing. With no heat, if
If
he's
it
going to
were-
do any kind of heating, then he's certainly got to go back and talk to Adam, but
When it's been, for instance, the shed at the quick fill gas station that was approved had a fire extinguisher just inside the door. And I don't see anything more than that here. So,
Right.
yeah,
I'd be more than willing to put it on our list, that's
That
all
may
fine.
be covered under building code. We're still
Okay,
reviewing, we're
all
still
right.
yeah,
reviewing
it's a sta- it,
the permit, so if the building code requires it, it'll be required.
all right. Any other questions, concerns for anyone else? Anyone from the public? All right, let's walk through this. First criteria, undue economic hardship. Although the applicant doesn't have any specific numbers, he did provide us with, I think, reliable information that north of 5,000 for the structure. We've seen this stuff before. It can be expensive, and how he's described what he's going to use it for. Again, it's either completely closed in once the restaurant and bar has been closed, and the only time any of those doors would be dropped down would be during temporary inclement weather. Would anyone like to add anything to the first criteria? I'm looking here, an estimate over 100,000 for fire protection. Yeah, where'd that number come from? Oh, okay, all right. So we're going to go with your quote that it's going to be north of 5,000 for that structure. Second criteria, the physical or legal impossibility. I can't really see it being a physical or legal impossibility. You can do it. The bigger piece of it is that it's expensive. And I think the biggest piece we're looking at is the comments from the fire marshal. Third, the impediment to intended objectives of this section. It's not because, again, the fire marshal has indicated that due to how you're going to use the building, for security purposes and as well as some temporary protection from weather, as well as an understanding that if there were any kind of heating units or heating elements, that you would have to discuss that with the code enforcement officer. Fourth, necessity in light of other viable alternatives which meet the objectives of the code of the section. In this case, is really not any other alternatives. You was also indicated, we'll add in here, that you're going to have all the electrical will be GFI protected, so that's good. Fifth, we have the recommendations and comments submitted from the fire chiefs. As indicated, they have no objection to it. And also, it's the understanding that if there's any type of heating elements to be used, you're going to talk to the code enforcement officer. Would anyone like to add anything else to the criteria for the waiver? None. Take a motion, approve the waiver.
I make a motion to approve it as read.
I'll second it.
I'm sorry, who did? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Good luck. Thanks so much for your patience.
Thank you guys very much for your
Like some
time.
2x4s.
Thank you. Feel free to come down and see me sometime in the summer when it's done.
One second, let's get. One second. All right, Mr. Haskell, you have an application for a shed.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, so, if we could return back to that in a little bit later, yeah, so the shed is, which one is easier for me to point to over here? Placed roughly over there. This is the neighbor's shed right over there. It was tried to initially place it so it was equidistant between the two properties. And if we could return back to the original picture that was up there with the flags. Yes, so the flags that you're looking at over there are where the wire for the invisible fence lies. Now, we inherited this property from the people, we inherited the invisible fence from the people prior to us, and apparently they, 10 years prior, inherited from them. So that, for 2 years plus, was the understanding of where the property line between us and our neighbor was. So when I initially placed this shed there, like I said, I attempted to make it equidistant between their shed and our shed. Single-family household, we needed an immediate solution. We have, right now, a 4-month-old and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, so we needed a place to store things. There's a single shed, a single garage, and we needed a place to park both cars. We had to get things out and put them someplace else. I have no interest in keeping the shed. It is, to my knowledge, when I bought it, it was $380 from Home Depot. It's being held together by 287 screws. Nothing more. There's nothing that's breaking the ground. Our intent, it was and is, to build a permanent shed. Unfortunately, I can't, this picture is a bit askew, but may I approach?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is curved, and our intent is to have a permanent shed built over here. And I spoke with Al about this while he was still here. The property, for quite a bit amount of time, even today, if we were able to travel there, is marsh-like. I know that it's not designated as marsh-like, but it is marsh-like. So in the letter that I wrote to you, and I apologize for the hysterical typo where I wrote fauna instead of flora, so you're thinking bones are holding it up instead of roots. The placement was chosen because there were plants on that location, so there is a root system underneath that's able to hold it up. As I mentioned before, there is nothing breaking the ground, so the only thing that's holding the shed steady is plywood. That's it. Unfortunately, we're not able to actually buy a shed now, which was the intent. The intent was to have a permanent shed between all the kids' toys and all of my woodworking tools and everything else. We need a proper shed, but we had a water main break in the garage this year, which required a significant amount of remediation, and during the process of remediation, they found that there was an issue with the roof. So on top of the $12,000 that I've spent to date on the remediation inside of the garage, I'm now spending an additional $20,000 to get a new roof. So as a single-family household, single-income household, I just don't have the budget to build a proper shed this year. The intent is, like I said, to get a proper shed built as soon as plausible. I'm hoping next year. It depends, no longer than 2 years. And that would be right around there, and that would not require a variance.
In that drawing, is that the shed right
That's to my,
on the?
I drew that in with Alan when I sat down with him to review the application. That's to my best knowledge where the shed is right now, and the request for there to be a 10-foot rather than 15-foot setback. Because initially, there was a 10-foot setback when that where you saw the flags were. Unfortunately, our neighbor had an issue with, I think, the west
When you say there was a 10-foot setback,
neighbor.
it,
It was 10 feet from where you saw those white flags.
okay, but the property itself didn't have it had a 15-foot setback.
What I've learned is that there's a 15-foot,
Okay.
correct. When I initially did this, it even on the application says City Pittsford. My address is 7940 Oak Brook Circle, Pittsford, New York. My mistake that, I understand from speaking with Alan that it's Victor. Pittsford has an allowance of a 5-foot setback for a structure of this type because it's literally structurally no different than one of my kids' playhouses. And Alan told me that there's actually allowances for playhouses like that, which is why we don't need to submit an application when we need to build a kids' playhouse. So, yes, my request for a 10-foot setback is simply because it is quite literally not feasible for me to move it anywhere else unless it's going to sink into the ground. And I don't even mind if there's a time limit placed on this variance because if this shed lasts another year, I'm lucky. It was purchased last minute. So. There was, like I said, what happened with the property line was the neighbor, which I believe is to the west. Is it to the west? The other neighbor? Are we on the east?
No, hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's going to confuse the record. Talk to us. If there's
I
questions to the
apologize.
public, we'll ask
Yes.
the public. So talk to us, please.
The other neighbor had cut down trees, which caused my neighbor to have a survey run, and apparently the survey came back showing that the property line is actually where the fence is now, rather than what was the operating property line for what I have on record, 20 more or more years. Now, I have not had a secondary survey done, and that's,
How many
We will
feet?
do that, but-
How many feet are you away from the property line? 5?
5 feet, no, well, yes, 5 feet from the fence, assuming the fence is the property line. So I'm requesting that if that does remain the property line when we have a survey done, that I would need to move it 5 feet more, because when I went over it with Alan, an additional 5 feet is something that's doable. Anything more than that would sink into the ground.
All right, so let's just do a fact check real quick here.
Sure.
When you said, assuming that the property line is correct, or assuming that the fence is on the, unless we hear something otherwise, looking at the survey, going with our code enforcement officer, that is the fact right
Right,
now.
and that's why I requested the variance, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so we're,
Yes.
right now, the working knowledge the board will have is that your current shed, temporary shed, is 5 feet from the property line. Unless you have some other information.
No, that's true.
Go ahead.
That's what I discussed with Alan. It should be in his write-up as well. And the assessment, if you can go back to the picture with the flooding. Yes, is that, and I spoke to my landscaper as well, is that we can afford to move it over another 5 feet without any issue. And it's not an issue for me to move the shed,
We can
since
just move it
nothing breaks the
closer to
ground.
the house and then over another 10 feet. Right, I'm looking at
There's, so I realize that I didn't have anything over there, but closer to the house, there's trees, yeah, I mean, I could potentially bring it closer to the house, but that would run into another tree. There's this tree, and there's another apple tree right there. I'm happy to bring more pictures if you guys need it.
Sarah, you have questions?
The lot is over an acre in size, so I have a hard time believing that there's nowhere else where the shed can go to meet the code requirements.
That's why I said I'm happy to bring more pictures. I mean, if you believe that a shed should be in the middle of a property, then you're correct, that we could potentially move it into the middle of the property, but who would put their shed in the middle of the property? That's why,
It's not necessarily, you don't have to move it in the middle, but what I think Sarah's point is that you can move that shed any number of places and be in compliance with the code. We're looking at the criteria. And all these elements that we look to is basically one of this, can you comply with the code?
right, and that's what I discussed with Alan. That's why I'm happy, if need be, to bring more pictures, because unless I bring it into a place that no one in their right mind would place a shed in a house, then there's nowhere in the back lot area that I can place it where it won't be subject to the flooding that this would cause. That would impede the placement, essentially.
Go ahead, Donna, questions?
Where are you going to place this new shed that you're
So
talking
the new shed will have a foundation built. That's what I was trying to say. The new shed will be properly built. It will be properly have a foundation in the ground, and I plan on having it hidden so that we don't have to see it, because nobody wants to see their shed when they're in their house, in the back area over there, which will
would it be
take
on this
remediation
map?
into account.
Where would it be on that map? Can you bring that map up, Susie?
Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
You're pointing to an area on the survey map. What's the best way to say this? There's a compass, correct, on the survey map,
Yep, upper left.
right?
Upper left.
So you were pointing to an area that is, right, that's further north of the compass, but on your property,
There you go.
Oh, yes.
right?
Northwest.
I'm just trying to use some words
Yes,
so
sir.
our record is as accurate as it can be.
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, so despite the flooding, we've spoken to some people when we still had, prior to having to spend the money on remediation for the garages here. We got some quotes, and they're able to create a foundation in that area that won't impede placement, despite the flooding.
How are you going to get to it if it's flooded all around it?
That's part of what the construction is going to be. They're going to remediate the flooding.
I'm talking about the walking to it. So you're saying they'll just regrade the back. You're
Right,
gonna regrade
right.
it.
There's going to be some remediation so that the water flows out more. Because in the back over there is a hill that goes downward to,
And you're,
Stream.
but you're still asking for a variance even for the new one?
No,
I see
no.
you're
No,
not asking for,
the new one will not require a variance, no, sir. New one's going to be constructed
You
properly.
wanted to put 10 feet from.
yeah, that's what I thought. I thought you wanted 10 feet for the new
Oh,
one.
that's what I tried to clarify with you over email. No, the new one's not, absolutely not going to require a variance. It's going to be possibly 20 feet or more. I don't even see it being a problem with code at all. Yeah, no, I want it hidden. I don't want to see, I don't think anyone wants to necessarily see their shed when they look out from their house.
So this one can't be moved, is that why you're here? Like, why can't you move this one now?
Ma'am, I can move it an additional 5 feet from where it is.
Okay,
If I move it any more than 5 feet, which is why I'm requesting 10 feet rather than 15 feet, then I run into that floodplain, which
It's only
goes,
going to be
So-
temporary.
it's a temporary, which is
So
why
why
I
not
said.
just move it 15 feet? And,
Right.
you know what I mean? If it's going to be temporary, I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
No,
If it's gonna be
and
temporary.
that's fine, and that's why I'm happy to bring any discussion I've had with, trust me, I've run through this with as many people as possible. I'm not trying to be difficult. I want this done with. This is, like, we have so many things to deal with. If we were to move it over, I cannot tell you, given that we're a single income household, when I can recover from what is now a $32,000 investment between the remediation in the garage and the roof, when I can go and spend what our initial quote was $11,000 for the new shed. I can't, I'm sorry. So, but can I say it's going to be within the next 2 years? Yes. If it's 2 years from now, then this shed, at some point, if you go back to the flooding, is going to sink. It's going to sink.
What about the north end of the property?
What do you mean, the north
Back
end
to
of the
the-
property?
I think the stars, so north is to the right, correct?
Right.
What if,
So they're,
the north end, like, right,
right where I was just showing?
the vertical line,
Yes. So this
even
area-
farther, even closer to the house? Anyway, I mean, I see a lot, I see a
So there's-
small shed, and I see a
there's-
lot of space.
There's a big tree over here.
Huh?
There are trees all over here. There are trees, a line of trees over here. There are trees where I showed you, a tree right there, a tree right there, a tree right there.
And it can't fit anywhere
There's-
over there.
There's a birch tree right there. There's a birch. I promise you, we can adjourn if you want more pictures. I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, I don't
would
think you're
love
trying to be difficult.
supply
I'm-
more
I'm-
pictures.
I'm not trying to be
Yeah.
either. I'm
No, if-
inquisitive. I mean, that's what I get paid to do,
If I
right?
could place this anywhere else, I would love to do it just so this can be over. I really would. I don't want this to be
Like,
difficult.
I look at the photo that you have here,
Right.
and I frankly still see a lot of space. I don't, maybe I'm the only one, but I don't see.
This area over here. I don't know, because then I started running to there, because there is a rock section over here that took that rock area out. All I can say is if we placed it anywhere else on that side of the house, on that side of the property, it would look extremely awkward. And I know that one of the requests is that we don't impede the way that the town looks. It would be extremely awkward to have anything there. We'd have to have it at
How would it be awkward?
a strange angle. Yeah.
How would it be awkward?
Why would it be awkward?
especially if it's temporary. If you're only leaving it there for a brief amount of time, why does it matter if it sits in the middle of your backyard for a year at the most?
Because the flooding that I'm talking about, which we have, runs all the way. It doesn't just flood here, it floods all the way there. So I would have to have it forward more, like around there. So we'd have a shed in the middle of our
Temporarily.
property.
Temporarily.
So the variance is going to run with the land, right?
The variance is going to run with what?
The variance runs when you, Michael, chime in.
Variances are, when he's referring to his runs with the land, so if you were to sell the property tomorrow, if a variance is granted, it stays with the property
Oh,
forever.
Gotcha.
right, unless something else changes. So when you say a temporary variance, it doesn't quite go together. It's-
I was inquisitive as well. I was
No, it's
just
okay.
asking.
That's why we have these conversations. Let's go back just a little bit. How long have you lived there?
We moved in, I purchased the house in 2018.
Okay. Was the shed there?
It was not,
All right, so you put the shed in.
correct.
When did you do that?
A year and change ago?
So 20,
Uh,
2021,
Sorry.
2020?
I don't recall at this, I could,
Okay.
give me a moment.
So you're plus or minus a year. That's your recollection?
I'm always a pre or post-COVID now with everything. Give myself a,
Well, I'm also dealing with lack of sleep from being a new parent, like I said, 4-month-old, so. 2020, November 2020.
How big is the
roughly.
shed?
Shed is 8 foot by 12 foot, I think. 7 foot by 12 foot.
Approximately
8 by 10, did I see somewhere?
8 by 10 sounds right, right?
Okay. So 8 by 10. All right, and have you looked into, if you were to move it, how are you going to move it? Are you going to?
I would move it just like I did when my neighbor first approached me to move it.
Which is?
Lifted up and pulled it.
Okay, so manpower, your
Yes, manpower,
people power.
yes.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of like you asked, I could technically place this anywhere. It's just a matter of,
So the problem then becomes what Matt was talking about, it runs with the land. Nobody has a crystal ball. So when you say temporary, and we've been down this road before with other people, it's like, well, we're going to fix it, we're going to take care of it, and 6 months goes by and it's still not fixed, and 12 months, it's still not fixed, and it puts this board in a bit of a bind. It's like, well, now we're
I understand.
hurting cats. So
Yeah.
if it's a small enough shed, and if it's going to take some people power, a weekend and your buddies or gals, and you pull it away, and if it sits there for 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years,
No,
it's
it's gonna
still
be- it's
compliant
gonna
with the
be-
code, and
no.
then you can decide whenever you want to build it, and then it's off the plate of this board to figure out, well, has he done it? And the code enforcement officer really doesn't need to go knocking on your door. Did you move the shed yet? Is it compliant? It just puts a bigger onus on the municipality to figure out when it is that you're going to do the say you're going to do.
Right.
When it's a simple enough solution, if you can move it so you don't need a variance, why not move it? And then when you build your permanent shed, wherever you want to build it in compliance with the code, you're all set and you don't need a variance at all.
If that's the case, then I'm not going to be able to move this until at least July, when the land hardens enough. And if the board is fine with that, then I'll just withdraw my request.
July.
My landscaper can't even mow the grass back there. So if we're talking about a shed, which with things in it is going to be heavy enough to push things down, it's going to be at least late June, July before I can move it.
Let's hold that thought a second. Any other questions for now?
Well, I think that you're overstating the sinking problem. You have what in my view, a relatively minor drainage problem, which will take longer to fix than moving the shed will. I think you should move it 10 feet instead of 5.
And I'm saying I'm
And it's
fine
only
with that.
temporary, and you can do that by hand. And put a few bags of stone under it, and it won't sink.
Put a few bags of stone under it.
so what he's saying is
In the length of time you're gonna move it,
He's saying he'll move it to 10 feet.
Yeah, I'm
He said he just
agreeing.
needs-
you don't need a variance. I'm not in favor of voting for a variance, I'll tell you that right now.
No, I said I'm happy to withdraw it. I'm happy to
I
move
just
it.
think you should move it to 10 feet instead of 5.
That's what he's saying.
I'm
is,
agreeing.
well, he needs until June, July to do
Well,
it.
I don't think so.
Okay.
In my view, it isn't necessary because you move it by hand.
Get the stuff out of the shed and move the shed.
All right, so let's just hold that thought a second. Anyone from the public want to speak for or against? Come on up. Why don't you give them a little space and, thanks so much. You are?
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm Timothy McGill. My wife Wendy and I are owners of the adjacent property south of Mr. Haskell's property.
You wrote the letter.
Yes, I have Mr. Haskell's statement on the 5 considerations that the board members are supposed to consider in looking at a variance. And he added some context. The one thing he mentioned that if I could, and thank you for letting me comment on this, because this is crazy to have an area variance on a setback in a subdivision where all the lots are 1 to 2 acres, with a movable accessory storage shed. And I appreciate your letting me comment on it, because I don't think you should have to spend your time on something like that. The first reference that I like to comment on is those flags for the underground fence for the dogs. We put that in. That's the first I ever heard of that. We put those flags in, because when we bought our lot in 1996, we've been there a long time, and we had a dog, and we tried to use the underground fence, and we didn't like it. My wife didn't like it the way the dog hit it. That's not from an instrument survey, from a surveyor. That's an underground fence. When we bought our property, I had it staked, surveyed. I knew where our side lot lines were. And that's not it.
Those flags are on your property, correct?
Yes. So I knew where, if you'd be kind enough to let me tell you, this is 2020. I came home from golfing because it was the first year of the pandemic, and I was working mornings, golfing in the afternoon, and then working at night. I came home, and my wife said that the neighbor on the other side of our property, and that's further to the south, is an accountant, and he had just bought a young person like Mr. Haskell a couple of years before. He was cutting down trees in our backyard and expanded his backyard, seeded the grass, and expanded his backyard into our property. My wife went out and said, "You're cutting down trees in our property," and he said no, and he was waiving the instrument survey, but he didn't have it staked out. I knew that he was on our property, so I had to get a surveyor, pay for that, staked it, and he was a good 20, 25 feet, expanded his backyard into ours. So I applied the zoning board gave me a permit to build a split rail fence. Otherwise, in 10 years or so, I'd lose the property right to that portion of my backyard. That property owner never apologized, never mentioned it. So that cost me thousands of dollars for the split rail and for landscaping. That's just a lead-in. When I had it staked out because of that going on to my south, we had a corner stake at the lot line and I knew where our lot line was there too, but it turns out that, and he had put this movable shed either on our property or right on the line. My wife thought it was on our property. I was golfing again. Maybe the golf is the problem, I don't know. So I mentioned, so he had it, she thought on our property, but if it wasn't, it was right on the line. I went over and talked to Mr. Haskell. And I submitted pictures earlier. Here's a number of these.
Thank you.
That's in September of 2020, and the shed's empty and movable. And as Mr. Haskell just said, he moved it once from being on our property to 4 feet. We think it's about 4 feet. So I walked out to his backyard. It's still empty, as the picture shows.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. These are all the same?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so I'm just going to pass them around. Thanks.
This is in 2020. So I walked over to the backyard, and I didn't even know Mr. Haskell. He'd only been there 2 years. And I wasn't in an argument or anything. I was very naive. I thought that I was just giving him some information. I said, I was aware of what the zoning requirements are in our subdivision because I just had the split rail on the other side because of the problems there. So I mentioned to Mr. Haskell, I said, I just want to let you know there's a setback requirement, even for an accessory storage shed. And I told him it's 15 feet. And the town website says you should contact the town, you're going to need a permit, and you may even need to amend your site plan. And I had to get a site plan amendment for my split rail fence, which is fine. So he didn't say anything. Then the next day or a few hours later, he sends a text to my wife's phone. He must have had hers. And it included the town of Pittsburgh zoning regulation that had a 5-foot setback. Now, when I mentioned to him, it said it's 15 feet. I didn't say in the town of Victor, I just said it's 15 feet, you need to contact the town. So I responded and said, this is Tim. We don't live in the town of Pittsburgh. We live in Victor. And that's understandable because, as he said, we have a mailing address that's Pittsburgh mailing address. So I don't have a problem with that, and I explained to him again, and I said, it's 15 feet, and we live in a limited development district. Now, I know a lot of you probably have a lot of property, and you may be in parts of the town where there isn't even a setback at all, and that's fine. But in this subdivision, it's a limited development district with 15 feet. And he responded and said, this is no more development than my kid's swing set. So now we're arguing whether or not the law is proper. And I had nothing to say other than that's what the law is. And it is the law because zoning regulations have the force and effect of law. So what I mentioned to Mr. Haskell was he needed to go to the town zoning and building department to get pre-approval and to get a permit. He said it's temporary, just a little bit of what you heard today. But in September of 2020, temporary was this spring, 2021. And I'm going to have a big shed with pylons and a road, et cetera, back in the woods. Well, when you go in the woods to the west, we don't own the woods all the way to the west. If you go out and look at our property, once you get to the woods, it's not our property. So I don't know where it's going to be, but if it can be where he pointed today, why didn't he put the temporary shed there? And he never said anything about, I could do, and if that's the only place, why didn't he have it 10 feet in to start with? So, but he said it was temporary until the spring of 2021. And I still said to him, no, it's 15 feet. I didn't agree that it's temporary. And I said to my wife, we'll see what the temporary is. And now we're in spring of 2022, and now he's talking up to 2 more years. And as you mentioned, a variance runs with the land. The other considerations you have, the first one is whether it affects the subdivision or us, something that runs with the land. When I drove today, I noticed there's a shed across the street from me, a split rail fence and a shed, and it's within the setback. Now, if you look at, I don't know what pictures Mr. Haskell was giving you, but the second one shows side by side now we have sheds where my shed's 16 feet. This is 4. The second picture shows the land if he moves it 10 more feet, and you can see it's just a normal backyard. There's no swamp or anything. It's like my backyard.
Are the pictures of the same shed? Because one looks, unless it was painted.
Right, the first picture I gave you was how it looked before you put anything in it in September of 2020.
All right, let me actually slow down just a little bit. I appreciate what you're telling us, and I want to mark these so that, again, we have a record. So I'm going to mark the first one you handed, the picture with the shed in it. We're going to call
Where
that
it's
Exhibit A.
empty, right.
Right. We're going to call that Exhibit A. The picture that you gave us with the split rail fence, we're going to call that Exhibit B. Okay, that's that one. Okay. Then the last one, I'm going to call that Exhibit C, and we're going to keep these with the file. So let's talk about Exhibit A just real quick. Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Did you take that picture?
Yes, I did.
All right, when, you took that in
September
2020, okay?
That was when it was empty, when he was first putting it up, and I was giving him a heads up.
Hold on, hold that thought. Just want to identify some of this stuff. Exhibit B, you took that picture?
Yes.
Okay, oops, sorry. Is that better? When did you take it?
Saturday, this weekend.
And Exhibit C, you took that one as well?
This weekend,
All right, this week, all right.
this past weekend.
Don't lose those pictures. Okay, good. All right, go ahead, continue.
Wait, hold on. Question though. Exhibit A has no fence and the shed is white. Exhibit B has a fence and the shed looks blue. I'm just trying to make sure I
Black.
understand.
Yeah,
Black.
the shed initially, there was no fence, and I had had it staked out because of the other neighbor cutting it down trees.
This isn't the fence on the other side of the house that you were saying. You have a fence on both sides.
Now I have on both sides. Because of this shed thing, I looked, so
The
then,
shed's just been painted, I take it.
And he
Okay, okay, I
painted
get
it.
it. I totally get it.
yeah, it's been painted, it's the same shed.
Okay.
But you could see it didn't have a fence, and this fence cost me a couple $1,000s. We're worried about his garage, but I mean, at some point,
And in Exhibit A, you had that staked out? I'm seeing stake with
I
the,
had it staked out because of the other side, but I had the whole property corner staked by an instrument survey, paid for it.
that's what I'm getting.
And then I didn't have the string there when he was starting, so he started out on my backyard. Then I had my landscapers put a string there to the side stake, and he moved it to 4 feet. And said nothing about, well, I could move it to 10 feet. But in any event, I said it's 15 feet. I told him all the things. I said, please contact the town. And I actually volunteered. This is the first day, before we put anything in it. I said, if you don't want to contact the town, I will for you if you want me to. I was naive. I'm telling you, I was very naive. I thought he would say, oh, thank you, I didn't realize it was 15 feet, and he'd move it to 15 feet. Now, the reason I say that is I'm old school, and I think one of the great things about our country and this town is we have property rights, constitutionally protected contract rights, and the rule of law. And all those things separate us from banana republics, from socialist countries. And this, I know it's very minor, but it's almost to me like back in the 90s when New York City had the broken windows approach to policing. You have to enforce the minor violations so that there's a respect for the rule of law. I believe in that. Now, I know you have the authority and power to deny a variance like this or to accept it, but I believe that if you look at the 5 factors you're supposed to consider, Mr. Haskell says that I should have, cannot possibly impact me because it's on the other side of our fence. Well, I'm the adjoining neighbor. A setback, I believe, is for my benefit, not his. How can you say that because it's on the other side of the lot line fence, it couldn't possibly impact me? And he's worried about how it looks on the other side of his backyard that I heard today. He can't have it over there because or he's got to put it back in the woods because nobody wants to look at a fence. Well, what about us looking at a fence, you know? It's almost like our property interest and property rights are ignored. And it's so minor, I just feel awful even, I really hate to object to a neighbor seeking this variance. But with that little land use story of mine, hopefully you can understand why I brought it to his attention. I thought he'd just move it, and I brought it up a couple times since then, and he wouldn't. And now I'm hearing things about flooding, et cetera. I haven't seen any professional certification by an engineer, some landscaping, some real estate person to say that an easily movable, and he already moved it once to 4 feet off my property, and he'll move it 5 feet to 10 feet, but he won't move it another 5? And my understanding in the town law is that there has to be a unique hardship. And if you do grant a variance, it should be the minimum necessary and adequate. It's hard to see the necessity on this type of, easily movable accessory storage shed. And to let them and then saying it's temporary. We've already gone, I was told September 2020, and in April, he'd be doing this other shed. And now it's a year later, and now he's saying 2 more years. I feel that she complied with the law.
Appreciate your thoughts and comments. Thank you. Would you like to comment?
Yes.
Wait, hold on. Time
Thank
out.
you. Sure.
Have you seen these pictures that he offered?
No.
So there's a set for you. Yep, there you go.
Yes. So, first, Tim,
No, hold on.
oh, I'm sorry, may I?
Nope, you
speak?
cannot.
I may not, okay.
Talk to
So
us. It's-
put.
Hold on, let's not talk over each other.
Okay, sure.
If you have a question that you think that you would like us to ask Mr. McGill, we'll consider it, but we're not going to
Okay.
get into
Sure.
the applicant and a neighbor having a discussion.
Sure,
Okay.
okay, yes. So yes, Tim approached me when I was putting the shed together and informed me of the setback. Now, as far as, this is actually a great picture because it shows where the forum was and why I chose that location.
But you're looking at Exhibit A,
This is Exhibit A, and this is
right? That's B.
So, I put the string up because I wanted to comply with 5 feet. This is when I still was under the impression we were in Pittsford. There was at no point that he told me about Victor, but I don't want to argue about this, because I just said before that I'm fine withdrawing this application as long as I can have time to move it, because whether you guys need it or not, I've spoken to my neighbors' landscapers, who are there almost every day. I've spoken to my landscaper, and that land will remain that wet and difficult to move things, especially this, when I have to take things out and then move it at least through the end of June. I know that because he can't mow the lawn until the end of June. Now, as far as the
Can I ask
stakes
you,
for
before
the,
you go any further, you've said that a couple of times. As far as other information,
yes,
would you be willing to get from your landscaper, whoever's cutting the lawn, in fact, he cannot cut the lawn until the end of
I'm
June?
very happy to, yes. They were just there this weekend. They had to stop, they couldn't do it.
Entire lawn, he can't cut the lawn.
They used, no, what they used was what's it called?
Weed whacker?
The weed whacker, right. They used the weed whacker to cut the lawn in the back over there, because yes, it stays that wet. It happened to be dry because when Tim took the pictures, my neighbor, but it is wet now yet again, and I'm happy to provide those pictures.
I'm just trying to get some clarification.
Sure.
I thought I asked you, if not, I apologize. Can your landscaper cut your lawn, the entire lawn, until the end of June? Just can't do it.
He cannot bring his heavy equipment because they ride on 0-point tractors or whatever, mowers. He cannot bring the 0-point mower back there.
All right, let me
until-
try and ask a very specific question. You have 1.1 acres of land, is that
Right.
correct?
Correct.
So, for this season, your landscaper cannot mow any of it.
No.
None of it.
He can mow all of it except for the portion.
Okay, now we're getting clear.
Yes,
So
I
the-
apologize if that wasn't clear. Yes, he can mow with the 0-point mower up to where you can see the flooding is.
If I could then, doesn't it beg the question then, why can't you move it to where he currently mows and still be in compliant with the code?
There's a tree there. I can bring, if I bring it forward more and 15 feet out, which I'm saying I'm fine taking it 15 feet out. I'm going to withdraw the application. But if I were to bring it forward more, then I would have that tree blocking the entrance to some capacity, unless I put it askew.
You've indicated that your permanent shed,
Yes,
in your mind, it's going to be built in 2023, 2024.
it was supposed to be built, as Tim indicated earlier, but COVID now garage, yes.
I'm not suggesting this board is okay with that. What I'm just trying to figure out is if you're going to be in compliance with the code where that permanent shed is, why don't you move the shed that you currently own to the spot where it's going to be, the permanent shed?
Because I cannot, as I mentioned before, I cannot speak to when I'm going to be financially able to have that built.
You gotta get the back regraded.
Okay.
And the back, they have to do remediation. It's just off to the side. There is some remediation because they knew the property had some flooding, but I don't know what happened over time. Maybe my neighbor does because he knew the neighbors beforehand. It's gotten worse. They need to fix it. There is some kind of land remediation that needs to occur. I'm happy to move it. I'm simply saying that in order for me to move it where I would like to move it, which is simply just adding the extra feet that I need to in order to move it north, I believe that way is north,
You're gonna move it towards the water.
towards the water, yes.
You really wanna move it
No,
towards
no,
the
no,
water.
I want to, there's a dry patch here. See, I can move,
But you gotta go 10 feet, right?
correct.
So,
I
I was,
have to bring it forward a little bit, I'll bring
right,
it.
I mean, if you look at Exhibit A, I'm just trying to figure out why you couldn't pull it forward and then to the right.
I'm sorry.
Exhibit A, here's my chicken scratch. Right, why couldn't you drag it forward and move it to the right? Then you're,
So that's here.
Well, if the applicant's willing to move it to comply with the code,
I don't know why the tree is.
we don't have to keep going over it.
Forward, there's a tree there, and there's a tree.
and then to the right, but you're gonna move it forward, not into the tree, but then you're gonna move it to the right by 10 feet.
Right. and
So
there's
the tree's
another
not
tree
10.
There's a tree here, there's a tree here, there's a tree.
I'm just, we're looking, this one is Exhibit C now, and it just looks,
Like there's nothing, right?
Right,
I don't see any trees.
and it's not wet either.
So in this case, you're gonna be moving it forward and then over here.
So this is taken from the front where it's dry. That's.
Right, that's why we're saying it, drag it to where it's
And
dry.
This is where, fine, I will do that. What I'm saying is, this tree is noticeably absent, which is right here, just out of view. So, yes, which is why I said I'm happy to, I will withdraw the request.
And move the shed.
Yes, sir, that's what I said.
So
You don't need till July then, if you're gonna move it forward to where it's
If I
dry.
can move it forward to where it's dry,
we do it this weekend.
Did you get a permit for this when you did do it, or no?
no, because initially, when I spoke to Pittsford, this is a structure that does not break ground, and it, like I said, essentially meets everything
All right.
that my kids' houses meet. They didn't need it, but then I learned that
I'm going
Victor
to make
does.
a proposal here. I understand everything that was happening, and you've heard from your neighbor. It's important. We meet in 2 weeks. We have the opportunity, unless there's some urgency that you want variance tonight.
No, I said I'm going to withdraw the variance request.
And just move the shed.
Right. I will do my best to see if I can move it forward without hitting into the trees. Yes, I will try and do that. I will have my landscaper over and see if we can get that done. In order to just move it where I wanted to, I would have needed at least until the end of June to get that done.
You want to withdraw your variance application.
Correct?
It's like you may have heard before, send an email verifying, I want to withdraw the application. Sure.
To,
Yes, yeah.
okay.
You're going to send it to Amber by the end of business day tomorrow.
Okay.
Can you do that?
I can, yes, that's easy, I can do it now.
Okay.
I have her email, I mean, we've been in communication over, yeah.
We're all set? Everyone's all set with that then? Good.
Are there any other codes that I need to know about? Color, like, are we not allowed to
Well, there's
change
a
a
whole book of
specific
them.
color?
No, yeah, we can't answer that question.
I mean, it's allowed to be black, right?
I don't know what you know, or I don't know what you don't know. If you have questions,
Code
either,
doesn't dictate color. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, the code would.
if you have questions, certainly, we have a code enforcement officer. I think Adam would be happy to have a chat with you. If you're
Okay.
not sure, if you're looking for legal advice, you need to talk to an attorney. We can't give you legal advice.
No, I was
I'm
asking
just
for
putting it on the table for
code,
you.
just code, yeah.
He
That's
can
it.
answer questions about code. Okay?
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks so much. Enjoy your evening. Pardon me?
Is there anybody else after me?
I think
No,
we're good.
we're good. Is there something? No,
I was just gonna.
we haven't adjourned yet, so if you want to stick around we'll probably be done in about 2.5 minutes. Just hang on. All right, is there anything else before the board? Drew, anything you want to chat about, talk to us, let us know? Great, good. Pardon me? I yield my time. All right. Adam, anything?
Not tonight.
Great. Anyone have anything else they want to add, talk about, suggest? We're good? Susie, we're
Well,
good?
that's the Sephora sign on pennies being a decal or something on the windows. That's still as much of a sign as any other sign. How is that forgiven?
I'd have to look into it for you, Fred.
I think it was on an interior window, wasn't it?
But it's on the outside, I think. I didn't walk right over to it, but you can see it from some distance.
Well, it's a good question. Adam's going to look into it and talk about it the next
Yeah.
meeting.
Well, with that, I'm completely out of ammo.
Okay, Fred. All right, then we're good. A motion to adjourn, please.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second
In
it.
favor?
Second.
Very good. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
I saw a truck with your name on it. Is that you?
That's my,